Hi, you are now listening to an episode of What is Your Story by Noisy Podcast. Enjoy!
Hi, my name is Moji and this is my story. I'm a 25-year-old female medical doctor. I just would like to share some challenges and basically explain my path. I feel like it would be nice to give everybody insight into what it feels like to be a young doctor trying to pave my way through the system in Nigeria and how I got here. So, I think I would like to start from high school because that is where everything started. When I was in high school, I was typical, do get good grades, go to school, do your work, do the best you can. And of course, it was on my path that, study medicine, be a doctor, as it is for most people that get good grades in high school. So I did just that, but I did like the idea of healing, I like the idea of being part of people's success stories, which is why I chose to be a doctor. But I feel like I had so much to learn, like I didn't really realize that it was not just as straightforward as I thought. After high school, I went to uni. I was in University of Ibadan. It was a whole experience. From the strike, I finished high school at 16. I was supposed to graduate at 22 because it's a 6 year course medicine. But of course, the system, the strike, the protests from students, from government, I ended up being in uni till 2024, spending a total of 8 years. So, but I mean, I even still had it good compared to a lot more people that have to spend longer doing shorter duration, doing courses that are supposed to go on for shorter duration. So while in uni, I think that's where a lot of my personality got formed, a lot of my personality and my values as a doctor currently. I think my biggest challenge, however, other than, of course, the long reading hours, slowly detaching from friends and family, because, you're a doctor, you're studying to be a doctor, you need to work harder. Um, my biggest challenge was losing my dad. And I want to tell you how I changed from before I lost my dad versus after. So typically, I'm very bubbly. People tell me even till now that you're always smiling, you're always happy. Like I was even bubblier if that's possible. I was very bubbly, very excited. Growing up, my dad was extremely involved in my life, and he was my basically my best friend. My mom lived in the UK throughout my high school, so my dad was there when I started my period. He was very present. He knew my courses, my exams. He would be, he came for holiday for visiting day. He'd come. So it was that kind of dad that was just there. And so losing him in 2020 to COVID was extremely difficult. Even till now, I get so annoyed when people say, "Oh, COVID is not real." Like, trust me, COVID was real, very real. Even going back and being in the healthcare system, it was so difficult. So after I lost my dad, I still had to go back to school and then try to get through school after having lost my biggest support system. But I think the most important thing was how it changed my idea of what loss is. I remember the first time I was on a ward round after my dad had died. My dad died also in a federal hospital, but in Lagos, not in Ibadan, not in UCH. So after I lost my dad, I went back to the hospital and I remember that we had a patient that had cancer. It was a very, very late stage cancer. It was an ovarian cancer. It was a woman, 50, and her husband was there. And we're trying to tell her the options of management. Oh, you need surgery, you need chemotherapy. But she started crying. She said she had lost two of her sisters to surgery and she didn't want to have surgery. But then, to be honest, the prognosis was so poor. And I remember looking at her husband as we were telling her the news, like, oh, even the surgery is basically not going to, do much. She was going to be dead in less than 3 months. I saw her husband burst into tears, and she as well was just looking at her husband. Like, before I knew it, I was burst into tears, which had never happened prior to losing my dad. But it just felt that much more personal because I feel like as doctors, sometimes we see patients as patients, but you forget that, they had a whole life. They have people that love them, people that depend on them. This is somebody's world crashing out. And I feel like even till now, I hold that with me so deeply. Like when patients die, it is that deep because that is somebody's dad, somebody's husband, somebody's life. Somebody's life has just changed forever. And I feel like that's really impacted how I speak to patients, how I even break bad news. But over time, I got stronger because I became extremely emotional. At some point, I got to a point where I was getting too invested, which is also a bad thing. It's good to care as a doctor, but I got to learn from senior colleagues, from it's a bad thing to be too invested, because you need to do what you need to do for the patients. You have to look at the bigger picture. And from then, I did try to get stronger, and then I got better, but I became more emotional, more passionate, and in some ways it made me better. But little did I know that my story was just beginning, because after graduating from uni, I became a medical doctor in Lagos. I decided to start working in Lagos because I wanted to change my environment and just see how it would feel. So I started working in Lagos, and my whole life was so different. I thought that because I was so, I'd volunteer a lot when I was in school, that it would be like that. But it was so different. I became a doctor, and I started realizing, I started with pediatrics, taking care of those little children and seeing just how deep it is when you have to tell a 6-month-old child that they have cancer. Is so different from telling an adult. When you see parents crying, I once saw a grown man on the floor crying, not knowing where to start. You see families that were comfortable going into abject poverty to where they are trying to afford a single pint of normal saline. From somebody that came into the hospital, being able to, you say, oh, please buy this drug, it's 50,000. They don't bat an eye, they pay. To, 3 months down the line, when it's a chronic illness, when it's something that requires constantly being treated, and they cannot buy something that is 2,000. To even me, myself, having to take out of my own salary to help these patients, because you can't just turn a blind eye. It's so emotional, and it's so difficult to be a doctor to anyone, even more so to children. Just going through that and just being able to see them. And then the sad part is that most of them die. Most of the children that have cancer end up dead. And having to break that news to parents, seeing them do everything they can, knowing that they cannot help their baby that is crying for pain or crying because seeing them buy this, buy that, and this child is getting worse, it just changed me so much. So going from pediatrics, being super emotional, being, sometimes I'll close work by 4, I won't be able to leave until 11, 10. The next morning by 5, 6 a.m. I'm back to work, and just being so invested in that, to going to ONG, because being a doctor in Nigeria, after the first year post medical school, you're doing your internship. So you rotate through 4 departments: pediatrics, which is for children; ONG, that's obstetrics and gynecology, which is for pregnant women and reproductive system of women generally. So people that have cancers regarding the reproductive system, ovarian cancer, uterine cancers, they're there, and basically anything relating to the reproductive system of women and pregnancy.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? If you love stories that make you feel at home and you love reading December love stories, check out our anthology, A Man and a Woman and Other Stories. You can get a copy of this book at Roven Heights Bookstore in Nigeria or at Vidya Bookstore in Ghana. You can also check out the link in our description box below for all of this information. Noisy Streets also hosts monthly book club meetings every last Saturday of the month. You can find all the information you need in the box below. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
Then after that, medicine is adult medicine. Basically, everything that involves an adult that does not require surgery is medicine. Then surgery is basically everything that requires surgery. So from pediatrics, I went to ONG. ONG was okay. I got to get involved, and I think that was probably the most fun, because people are basically excited. Happy to have their child. Although seeing women in so much pain will make you question whether you want to go through pregnancy, because it's not easy. But then also seeing people lose their babies, seeing people give birth to children, the child is not looking like what they thought. The child is coming out with multiple congenital anomalies. The child cannot breathe well. You see, the woman is just like, I remember we had a woman that gave birth to a preterm child, and she was hiding the child from her husband because she's like, look at what I've given birth to, because and the child was just not, it wasn't looking like the other kids, because he was looking so skinny. She would wrap him up and hide him, and that was like, it was just so emotional seeing women being insulted by family members, then abused, seeing women go through domestic violence. So, and then also the other side of it, so seeing men fight hard for their wives, seeing we had lost a patient on the table because she had 4 girls, and she tried so hard to give birth to a male child, and unfortunately the male child that she finally gave birth to died in her stomach, died in pregnancy. And then on the table, while we're trying to even remove the baby so that at least the woman can live, the woman also died. So the male child, nothing. The four female children, I don't know. I still think about what will be the fate of those children. Then just different people and their stories. And then from there, I went to medicine. Medicine, I would say, made me stronger. Medicine is where the most people died. A lot of people died in medicine. And it just changed me. It made me a lot more, a lot more assertive, a lot more, I need to fix this and move on, fix this and move on. And then it just changed me in so many ways. But it was not easy being the person that continually had to break bad news to people and say, oh, this person died, and seeing people cry, seeing small children outside cry, not really being able to understand what's going on, having to explain things to patients. Illiteracy in Nigeria is a huge barrier because people do things and it makes things worse. You're trying to explain to someone like, oh, this, and Nigerians, we love food. So trying to explain to someone that, oh, this person cannot eat because this person has a problem. Maybe they have an ulcer, or, they are vomiting. They have a medical condition in which they need to not eat so that we can focus on the condition. We need the bowel to rest. And you see them still trying to like hide and feed the patient because they think that it's just it's just different challenges. And then from there to going to surgery, as unemotional as I tried to be in medicine, I had a patient that held such a special place in my heart. It was a 27-year-old male. He had an autoimmune disease. An autoimmune disease is a disease that occurs because the body decides to recognize healthy organs or healthy tissue as bad. So naturally, we have our immune system in the body that is supposed to identify when we have bad cells in the body. So when you have things like viruses, bacteria, or fungi in your body, it recognizes them as infections and fights against them. But sometimes there is a, let's say, glitch in the body, and it decides to it recognizes healthy organs as unhealthy and starts to kill them. And that's what an autoimmune disease is. So it can affect different organs. So there can be renal involvement, which is when it starts to fight the kidneys. There can be skin involvement. So the person will just suddenly start having rashes, discoloration, and all that. There can be liver involvement. So you notice that the person's having, their eyes are yellow, their stool is pale, and there's just different ways it can present. So this particular patient had renal involvement and skin involvement. But he was a 27-year-old male, he was just living his life and this happened to him. But he had such a supportive system, his mom, his brothers. I personally am very biased to patients that have an amazing support system. Sometimes we have patients and their relatives just, they don't care. But this one, I like when patient relatives try hard because it makes, of course, I try hard, we try hard for all our patients, but then it makes it easier because like you ask for something and they're very open, if it's something they cannot do, we find out how to solve it. If it's something they can, they do it immediately and you don't have to start looking for them. So I was just very, very emotional with them. Like I would, talk to them, explain to them. His mom would read up on everything that was going on. She just was amazing. Their whole family was just amazing. And then, I saw how this boy was struggling so hard because he had to get on dialysis. I remember the first time we admitted this boy, he had to get a medication that was 630,000 naira. And then his mom got the medication immediately, no questions asked. But like he started to need dialysis. Dialysis is basically using a machine to do the job of the kidney. So it's basically done when the kidneys are bad. So because of the renal involvement of the autoimmune disease, he had to be getting dialysis. It got so bad at some point he was sick. So he got discharged after he was initially stable, and at some point he was sick, and he needed about 100,000 naira, and his mom just didn't have the money. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is somebody that barely 3 months ago was able to buy a drug of 630,000 naira with no questions asked. Like we asked for the drug, and the next day it was bought, and then she now was not able to get her child the care he needed because of about 100,000 naira. It was extremely emotional, and it just shows how when you have. I always say to people, when you have a medical problem, that's the only problem. Nothing else matters because it just envelopes your whole life. And unfortunately, he continued to deteriorate, and then he needed hospital care. But that's when there was a strike, so he couldn't come, and he continued to deteriorate. And then when the strike was over, she brought him. The day she brought him, he was really bad, and in about 3 hours he died. I remember when she called me, I was on a ward round working. When she called me that he had died, I came to come and see her because at that point I was no longer in that department. I had moved to another department. She called me, I saw him. I didn't know when I just started crying. Like it was unbelievable. I started crying. But the thing is, as doctors, just because you're crying doesn't mean work stops. After crying and staying with them for a while, of course I had to go back to work. And so I had my work to do. My eyes were red, still treating patients through crying for a loss that I just had. It was just so unreal. And, but the work continues. The work continues. We do our best, but the work continues. But I feel like obviously my whole life has led me to where I am now, but I still have such a long way to go and I'm still learning. I think that I would just like for everybody to just be in good health, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. If something is wrong, go to hospital early, know your path. And I think I love that now we all see that. And if you have a doctor friend, please be kind to them because genuinely, I'm so different now. I barely get to see my friends. Even personally, I feel like my patient's problems have become the center of my life to where, even my own problems just take the back seat sometimes, regardless of whatever the situation is, you need to keep working because nobody's going to treat these people. So yeah, just be kind and just be healthy. Thank you very much for listening to my story.
We hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of What is Your Story by Noisy Podcast. If you would like to be a guest on the show, click on the link in the description box below. And don't forget to share, to leave a comment, and to like this episode. Okay, I'll see you same time next week. Bye.